Senator Heitkamp.
In the category of shameless plugs, congratulations on holding a hearing on something that could be a problem later on and is not a crisis right now. It's such a rare moment. Seriously, the Homeland Security Committee is starting to weigh in on this, and I'm going to take this conversation away from the illegal and to the practical realities of what we're dealing with here. As this becomes, as Senator Merkley suggested, a common method of transmitting goods and services, payment of goods and services, replacing a dollar bill or replacing a credit card, which we know are long-standing methods. There are a tremendous number of challenges by not categorizing this. Now, I notice both of you, especially you, Jennifer, have deferred that, saying, thank goodness we didn't have to achieve that, that result, because we had enough broad authority that allowed us to pursue this. But let's take, for example, a Bitcoin being used to buy a pie. How do you ring that up on the cash register? What's the sales tax on that? How do you record it for income tax purposes? How do you transmit it for purposes of payroll taxes? How do you deal with this when it becomes more commonly accepted method of transmission? And so what I'm saying is it's not just nefarious groups, terrorists and illegal operations that have a potential of really skirting on the edges. It is, in fact, the more commonly accepted it is and the more available it becomes, the more difficult it is for regular kind of regulatory activities to be carried out, especially tax activities. I would like maybe your thinking on whether categorizing a Bitcoin achieves a result so that we then can think about the regulatory regime, or whether we need to create a whole new category and think about this differently. Either one of you can answer that question.
Sure. From an anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing perspective, and I'll go broader in a moment, but from that limited perspective, it's not as important. We have similar regulations across different parts of the industry. The idea that they're going to have anti-money laundering controls in place, that they're going to provide certain reports on suspicious activity to FinCEN, regardless of whether it's a commodity or a currency or a security. Those basic protections will follow however we define it. So from our perspective, it's not as important. But I take your point. Look, this country and all countries are going to have an interest in protecting consumers and protecting investors and thinking about monetary policy and thinking about taxing. All those things and reasons why we have regulatory and statutory schemes in every country around the world covering these issues. If Bitcoin truly takes off and becomes a serious part of the financial system, then those issues will need to be brought to the forefront. I think there is still a question, and that we can't assume that Bitcoin is going to become the major player that many enthusiasts think it will. It very well might, and far from me to know which way this is going to go. I did hear some venture capitalists speak recently, though, and say that they saw this as a binary investment. This is either going to take off and be the next great thing, it's going to be the cell phone of 20 years ago, or it's going to be a nice experiment that completely fails. And so I think we're waiting to see, and in the meantime, at least at FinCEN, we're trying to make sure that we protect our U.S. financial system from illicit actors.
Senator, I think you rightly pointed out the differences between legal activity and illegal activity. Illegal activity, and we can't be distracted by this, is illegal no matter what the means, whether it's paid for by cash, paid for by ACH,
Guns.
or exactly, or through now virtual currency. On the legal side, those actors who want to play by the rules will work through, agencies like mine will play by the rules set by FinCEN, and that's really the importance of a comprehensive set of regulations, both on the state and the federal level.
Just to follow up on a comprehensive set of regulations, you tell me, I'm now the state tax commissioner, and someone paid in a Bitcoin, and I call you up because I find out you have expertise, and I say, okay, just heard that this thing's trading for $700. Is that what the pie's worth? Do you think you'd come down and be my expert witness when I collect sales tax on $700?
Well, fortunately, I'm not the tax commissioner.
I used to be. And so, I mean, this is going to be a big challenge. And my point is that we can focus on the illegal part of this, but to the extent that it becomes recognized as a valid method in the perfectly legitimate commercial world of transferring goods and services, this is going to become an increasing problem. And the more the opportunity presents itself to evade, not illegally, but to avoid taxation, to say that actually was speculation, so are you going to pay capital gains on it? I mean, it's a really interesting challenge. And I think we need to be thinking about these issues if, in fact, we see this becoming a way to transmit goods and services that's more generally and regularly accepted. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just take this a different direction and just use my little time to tell a little story about when I used to regulate truth in advertising, and I couldn't get my advertisers to tell the truth, and so I told them they could put whatever they wanted in an ad, but I was going to take out a full-page ad right next to there saying, I don't regulate them. I don't regulate them, buyer beware. And we're really at that point, because the more we legitimize this in regulation, the more we commercialize it. And so how do we strike that balance? And I'm interested in the academic point of view and maybe the legal point of view. How do we strike that balance? Because to me, if we get involved in regulation, we legitimize it as a true opportunity.
Well, I think that there's a lot to what you say, Senator, that if we regulate, we do legitimize. And some of today's witnesses have talked about trust. And trust is a very important factor, particularly with financial products and services. So there is that risk. There is a bone in my body that says, I think that's a risk worth taking. And I think it's particularly worth taking as we think of these virtual currencies as having functions that are a lot like credit cards or debit cards in some respects.
But wouldn't you agree that right now, without any form of intervention, without legitimizing it, every buyer out there has to be careful, and that has restricted or limited or tapped down the willingness of people to participate. And you really are, it's kind of ironic because we want all the free enterprise system, but the regulatory scheme and saying I've adapted to the regulatory scheme buys you the opportunity to participate in the market in a way that other financial institutions participate.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there is, in my prepared statement, I make the observation that right now it looks like all the risks fall on the users.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, that's why maybe we're not seeing the growth that we would see if there was a bigger structure around it and greater clarity in that structure. But if people want to do their business that way,
But we just tell them, you go ahead, do your
Right.
business that way, but
And we're
we
not
aren't
gonna help you.
responsible, and we'll deal with sales tax consequences. We'll work through those issues in terms of value for value transfer, because you can deal a barter to barter. I mean,
can.
people can barter, and you still can do an analysis. You can do an analysis on what, in fact, is the capital gains or the short-term or long-term capital gains, and just try and adapt on a case-by-case basis the existing regulation without legitimizing. I'm interested in your point of view, Ms. Tunstall.
So my perspective on that is it's an analogy to social media, where a number of companies have decided to kind of stick their head in the sand and say, we're not going to engage in social media. And then, the company sucks.com gets founded, and then somebody sets up a fake Facebook page and pretends to be that company, and that company loses significant reputation when they choose to stick their head in the sand and not engage and not pay attention to what's happening. And so my concern with not getting into regulating this area and being interested in what happens here is that it could eventually affect our financial system's reputation.
I understand that, but my point is frequently in these situations, we think about how we're going to fix it or facilitate it, when maybe we should just leave it alone. And maybe that's the approach that we need to think about, and warn people, you're on your own.
So, and I think from a consumer perspective and from a user perspective, I think that was a very good comment, that is where we are, and I think that that's a very fair point.